Welcome to Made, the show about building yourself through grit, failure, and perseverance. This is Seth, and today we're talking about something that might change how you think about courage. See, most people believe that courage is something you either have or you don't, like your eye color or like your height. But what if I told you that courage is actually a skill, something you can build rep by rep, just like a muscle in the gym? Look, most people aren't stuck because they're broken, they're stuck because their courage is just out of shape. And like anything out of shape, you don't fix it with one leap, you train it, one rep at a time. Today, we're going to unpack the science of how courage actually works in your brain and body, and more importantly, how you can build it starting right now. But before we dive into that, real quick favor, if you're finding value in the show, please take a few seconds right now and rate it and review it on whatever platform you're listening on. So if you're on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, 5-star rating, it really helps this podcast be found by others, and I would just really appreciate it. All right, so I feel like courage gets romanticized like some bold, loud, heroic thing, but most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, it's messy. It is uncomfortable. It's terrifying. It's feeling the fear in your chest and doing it anyways. Not because you're confident, but because you at some point recognize that staying where you're at feels worse. I've done some pretty terrifying things in my life. I'm not going to lie, okay? Starting with moving to a new city at age 20 with $20 and a gift card to my name, okay? From there, walking away from a stable business to rebuild something entirely fresh. So the thing is, none of those things that I've done in my life started with bravery. They all just started with a single rep, a tiny action that felt impossible at the time. And this is the key insight that I think changes everything. Courage is cumulative. It compounds like interest in a bank. Every time you avoid something hard, you're actually making a withdrawal. Your capacity atrophies. But every time you act, especially when you're terrified, you're making a deposit. You're literally building the infrastructure for bigger acts of courage down the road. Now, let's talk about what actually is happening in your brain when you face your fears. Because understanding the mechanics, I think, changes the game entirely. Fear isn't an emotion just floating around in your head. It's physical circuitry. So when you experience something scary, your amygdala, think of that as your brain's alarm system, it encodes that memory through something called synaptic plasticity. It's literally wiring itself to remember that this thing is dangerous. Avoid it at all costs. But here's where it gets a little interesting. Every time you avoid that thing, what you're doing is you're reinforcing the threat circuit. You're telling your brain, yes, you were right, this thing is dangerous. The wiring gets stronger, the fear gets bigger, but when you approach that same situation anyway, when you do it in spite of the fear, something remarkable happens. You start weakening that fear circuit through a process called extinction. Extinction is your brain's ability to overwrite fear through repeated exposure without harm. It's not that the fear memory disappears, it's that your brain builds a new competing memory, one that says, actually, this isn't as dangerous as we thought. And here's the cool part. Repetition literally rewires your brain and your nervous system. So with enough reps, you shift from being fear dominant to safety trained. The same situation that once paralyzed you becomes manageable, even boring. You don't overcome fear by waiting for it to go away. You overcome it by walking through it again and again until your body stops flinching. That's not motivation speaking, that's neuroscience. Courage isn't a feeling, it's a trained response built through exposure, rep by rep. And these reps, they don't need to be dramatic. So speaking up in that meeting when your voice is shaking or making that awkward phone call that you've been putting off for so long, just generally stepping into small discomforts, those are the neural bricks of real courage. Each one of those bricks is literally reshaping your brain. But it's not just about your brain. Your entire body is involved in this whole courage building process. Let me introduce to you one of the most important players, your vagus nerve. That is the longest nerve in your body, and it's like a highway between your brain and your gut. It helps you shift from fight or flight mode into rest and regulate mode. So, according to polyvagal theory, when you're chronically avoiding things that scare you, your body gets stuck in threat mode. So, your vagus nerve essentially forgets how to shift gears. You're walking around in this constant state of low-grade panic, even when nothing's actually chasing you. But here's the good news. You can actually train your vagus nerves. Things like deep breathing and cold exposure and, yes, facing fears repeatedly all stimulate the vagus nerve, and they build your capacity to stay calm under pressure. This is where the concept of stress inoculation comes in. By voluntarily exposing yourself to controlled discomfort, so think cold showers, fasting, intense exercise, you're conditioning your body to handle stress better. You're teaching your nervous system, we can do this. We don't need to go into panic mode. The Stoics figured this out 2,000 years ago, way before we had fancy brain scans. So they practiced voluntary discomfort, not because they were masochists, but because they understood that comfort makes you soft. And when life inevitably gets uncomfortable, which it will, you want to be prepared. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your patterns. So train good ones. Build a nervous system that can handle pressure without you crumbling. But here's something crucial that I think pure physiology misses. Your nervous system needs a reason to endure. Without meaning, struggle is just trauma. With meaning, it becomes transformation. This is where Viktor Frankl's work becomes essential to understanding courage. Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, and what he noticed was something profound. He noticed that the people who survived, they weren't necessarily the most physically strong or the most optimistic. They were the ones who found meaning in their suffering. So, love for someone waiting for them back home, a future goal that they refused to give up on, even just choosing their attitude when everything else was stripped away. Purpose became respiratory, something they breathed when nothing else was left. One of his most famous quotes, I think, captures this perfectly. He says that if you have a why, then you can live with any how, and this applies directly to building courage. So if you want to develop real courage, you don't just do hard things for the sake of doing hard things. You choose hard things that mean something to you. So think about that conversation that you've been needing to have to save your relationship or to end it. Think about the career move that you've been wanting to make that more so aligns with your values. Or what about that boundary that you need to set with that person to protect your peace? The Stoics understood this too, okay? So they didn't just practice voluntary hardship because they enjoyed suffering. They did it to unhook from comfort and to widen their circle of control. So every cold bath, every skipped meal, every night sleeping on the floor, these weren't punishments, okay? They were training exercises. They were ways to prove to themselves that they could handle discomfort when it mattered. And I think this connects directly to daily life. So saying what needs to be said when you'd rather stay quiet, or showing up when you'd rather ghost. These voluntary micro struggles, as I'll call them, those are your training arena, okay? They're how you build the courage muscle for when life demands something bigger. And let me be clear, I think courage in daily life isn't always about climbing mountains or quitting your job or ending that relationship. More often, it's these small acts that nobody sees, right? It's sitting down to write that book that you've been putting off for years. It's filming your first piece of content, even though you hate how you look on camera, all right? It's finally booking the event space for that workshop that you keep saying that you'll host someday, right? The principle of exposure therapy shows us exactly how this works, all right? So you can't build courage by just waiting to feel ready. You build courage by taking action that stretches you slightly, just beyond your comfort zone. And then you do it over and over and over. Not so much that you're traumatized, but enough that you feel the edge. And here's what's happening on a neurological level every time you take one of these courageous actions, right? You're reinforcing prefrontal control over your amygdala. So your thinking brain gets better at overriding your fear brain. the pathways get stronger, the communication gets clearer, and this literally makes the next bold move easier. Not easy, but a lot easier. There's a difference there. All right. The repetitions that you refuse today become the fear that you carry with you tomorrow. So every time you back down from something that matters, you're just training your nervous system to back down. But every time you step forward, even when you're afraid, even when you feel like you're going to throw up, you're training your nervous system for courage. I've made some pretty big leaps in my life, all right? So I'd say starting at age 20, that's when I moved to a new city, all right? I had $20 to my name and a $50 gift card to Target. And that is not an exaggeration, okay? I was scared out of my mind. I even cried for like 5 minutes in the Target. It was my first time living on my own, had never lived outside of my parents' house. And so I sat there in Target with my $50 gift card, just crying. But I had this picture in my head of the type of life that I wanted to live. All right. So I took the chance. That wasn't bravery. That was desperation. But it was a repetition. 6 years later, I quit my stable 9-to-5 job to pursue photography full time. All right. I did not know if it was going to work out, but I knew that I wanted more than just clocking in and out. I wanted freedom. I wanted creativity. I wanted autonomy. So I took the chance. I built a career and I booked clients and I made a lot of money. And then I walked away from that. Okay. Not because I was failing, but because after achieving all those things, I knew that that wasn't the whole picture. And that was scary. Okay. But I had a bigger vision for how I wanted my life to look. So I took the chance. All right. I abandoned my photography gig, closed down my books. All right. And that was another rep. At age 35, okay, the age that most people are settling down and establishing roots, I uprooted my entire life from Maryland to Colorado, okay, to completely start over. All right. There was no safety net. It was just the quiet certainty that I could not stay where I was. I didn't know what was next, okay? I didn't know what was going to happen. I only knew what I wanted, and I knew that I wanted a different type of life. So I took the chance. I built another rep. And here's what I'll say. None of those decisions felt very brave at the time, all right? They were terrifying. My hands were shaking. I lost sleep. I second-guessed myself 1,000 times, but every one of those decisions was just another rep that trained the system that I live in now. And the system I live in now is a system that can handle uncertainty better. And here's what I want you to understand. You already have proof of courage in your life, all right? You've already taken hard steps. You've done hard things. Maybe you don't remember them as courageous because they didn't feel heroic at the time, but that's exactly my point. Real courage rarely feels heroic. It feels necessary. It feels like the only option, even though you're scared. So tap into those memories. Use them as evidence that you've done hard things before. When you have that evidence, it means that you can do hard things again. Every past act of courage is the foundation. It's the stone that you're laying for the next big act, right? So here's what I want you to take away from this podcast episode. Courage is not a leap over the canyon. It is a step off the curb. If you're waiting until you feel confident, then you're never going to move. Courage isn't confidence. It's action in the absence of confidence. It's doing the thing while you're still afraid. We both know that there's something that you've been avoiding, all right? Maybe it's, a conversation that needs to happen. Maybe it's quitting something that's no longer serving you. Maybe it's starting something you've been talking about for years. It could be saying no to someone that you always say yes to, or saying yes to something that terrifies you. Whatever it is, do it, okay? Do it today. Not because you feel ready, because you won't, and not because the fear's gone away, because it hasn't. It's still there. Do it because you want to become someone who can move through fear. Do it because you're building your courage muscle. And that is your rep for the day, right? Here's what you stand to lose if you don't start now, all right? The fear's going to grow. it's going to compound in the wrong direction. The thing that you're avoiding, it's just going to get bigger and scarier. And the stories you tell yourself about why you can't do it's going to get more elaborate and more convincing. But if you take this rep, if you just do this one small courageous thing and you do it today, that muscle will carry you through to the next challenge, and then the next one, and then the next one. Courage isn't magic. It's motion. Open the laptop, write the first paragraph, hit the record button, post the thing, share the idea. This is the rep that builds all the other reps. This is how you become someone who can move through fear instead of being moved by fear. Okay? Remember this. You are not made of ease. You are made through doing the work that scares you. You don't get brave and then you act. You act until you become brave. That's not a motivational quote. That is literally how your nervous system works. Don't let this be another podcast episode that makes you feel inspired for 20 minutes and then nothing changes. Your life is literally waiting on the other side of the thing that you're avoiding. Okay? It's not a perfect life. It's not an easy life, but it's a life where you trust yourself to handle what comes. It's a life where fear is information, not a prison. It's a life where you can move toward what matters even when it's hard. That life is built one rep at a time, and your next rep is waiting for you. This is Seth, and you've been listening to Made.